Ventures VC Startup Seminar Series, and welcome to the Introduction to Value-Based Pricing Methodologies. This is an introductory level talk on pricing for early stage innovation. So let me just quickly start off by introducing Ibica. At Ibica, we are a consulting and technology development firm, and we're specializing in pricing, go-to-market strategies, and talent management. And I am Rashaka. I am the principal consultant at Ibica, and I focus mainly on market segmentation studies and pricing design. And I also manage the development of our client solutions technology. And I will let Jessie introduce herself.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Just want to echo what Rajaka said. I'm very excited to be presenting again this year. So looking forward to sharing our intro to pricing knowledge and fundamentals and such. So the work I do at Ibica, again, like Rashaka, mainly around the value-based pricing and the market segmentation. I also do a bit of the market analytics and necessary data crunching for the segmentation part, as well as dabble a little bit with the packaging, but again, still learning about pricing, but excited to be here.
Thank you, Jessie. So we would like to learn a little bit about who you are, and we do have a poll. Angie, over to you. So if you could tell us a little bit about the market that you deal with, what your role is, and are you responsible for pricing within your organization? This is exciting. We have a great mix of people here. So 56% of the participants today are B2B, dealing with the B2B market, 38% B2C, and 6% other. I would be curious to know what other is, but I will hold off till the end of the presentation. 13% of the participants are in product management, owner, 52% product owner, sales, services, other, and 90% of you are responsible for pricing within your organization. So very exciting. We have a very good mix within the audience. So, you know, when it comes to value-based pricing, whether it's B2B or B2C, the approach is essentially the same principles apply. And as we go through this presentation, you will see, because a lot of the times people think that how you price for business to consumer versus how you price for business to business is quite different, but it is not. When you think about value-based pricing, pricing is based on how you're creating economic, emotional, and community value for your customers. And you may say, hey, does emotional value play a role in business to business? It does, and we will go deeper into it as we get through the presentation. Again, we see a good mix of participants and roles here, and that is great to see because pricing should not be designed in a silo, right? It is not meant to be designed in a silo because it requires input from all the different various stakeholders within an organization, especially in the early stage. Product owners and product management plays a key role, especially in the early stage as you're carving out your space. Your product roadmap, value creation, pricing all go hand in hand. Now, within the early stage, typically what you see is many aspects of your company may be incomplete, right? There may be management team may be lacking key individuals. Product often is still in development, but you do have a product roadmap. Product may be in beta, and sometimes the product is commercialized but is not generating quite a lot of revenue, but it's on a limited basis. And it is at this time that you're looking to attract funds from accelerators, angels, and maybe even VCs. Next slide, Jessie. So this is where pricing plays a key role, right? Pricing power is so important to your investors. Pricing power is your ability to price based on your unique differentiation within the market and to have that price accepted by the market without pushback. Now, as Warren Buffett once said, he only invests in companies that have pricing power. So it is a critical lever. Pricing is central to how you communicate your value and position your offer. And when we talk value, we're talking economic value, right? How you are impacting your customer's business, emotional value, as well as community value. And Jesse will go a little bit deeper into what community value are in the following slides. We cannot stress this enough. Good pricing starts with great market segmentation. I mean, you cannot have good pricing without good market segmentation. It is the foundation of your pricing strategy. And you need to be able to connect the value metric to the pricing metric. This is critical. When we say value metric, it is the unit of consumption by which your customer derives value, the unit by which your customer derives value, and the pricing metric is the unit by which you price. So the value metric and the pricing metric must be in alignment. And of course, in the following slides, we'll go into much deeper analysis into how this plays out and what the different value metrics and pricing metrics are. Next slide. So on the agenda today, so we'll start off with some basic framing principles for value-based pricing. We're going to then delve deeper into value, economic, emotional, community. We're going to look at differentiation and how what role market segmentation plays in value-based pricing. And then we're going to leave you with some core pricing concepts to get you started. So the first framing principle, good pricing has to be fair, transparent, and consistent. So when we say fair, what do we mean? Fairness in pricing basically means, is the pricing proportional to the value that is being delivered? And when we say fair, it has to be perceived fair by your customer, right? So is the pricing proportional to the value that is being provided? And different stakeholders receive and pay for value in a balanced way. Now, this becomes critical, especially within a B2B setting, right? You have to create value for the buying organization. However, there may be various buying stakeholders. Now, you may be creating overall positive value for the buying organization as a whole, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that there are times that you won't be able to please every one of the buying stakeholders, right? Sometimes because of their specific KPIs, you might actually be creating negative value for them. So you have to be cognizant of that and see how you're creating value for the buying organization in a balanced way that kind of leaves everyone feeling like, you are creating value for them. Then there is transparency. Good pricing needs to be transparent. Do the stakeholders understand why they're paying, how much they're paying, and when they will pay? Nobody likes surprises. And this applies everywhere, whether in B2C, B2B, even business to government. And it becomes very critical when business to government, because when you're asking taxpayers to pay, you better be able to make a case for why they're paying, how much they're paying, and how much they're willing to pay, and when. Then the third framing principle is good pricing needs to be consistent. Now, this consistency has to be a pricing and value delivered has to be consistent across time. And the same guiding principles need to be applied to different market segments. So what do we mean by consistency? You don't have to charge the same price, right, for different market segments, but the principles through which you get to your pricing, they need to be consistent. You may charge different prices, but the principles need to be the same. For instance, if you are servicing different geographic markets, right, and the pricing metric and how you're charging is completely different for your different geographic markets, then this will lead to confusion in the customer's mind and they will question your pricing, right? Because if it's not directly related to exchange rates and they don't know why they're being charged very differently from each other, it's going to lead to mistrust. And this is something that you absolutely don't want. You want fairness, you want transparency, and you want consistency in your pricing. So fairness, transparency, and consistency are a product of the value cycle. This starts with understanding value. How are you creating value, right? Are you creating emotional value, economic value, community value? So the foundation of the value cycle is understanding emotional, economic, and community value, who you're creating value for, how you're creating value. Are you able to communicate the value to your customers? Are you able to deliver on your value promise? And confirmation is critical to making sure that the value is actually being delivered to all stakeholders, right? Is the value promised being delivered? So you need to have a process in place that captures and documents confirmation of value delivered to the customer. And only when you have all of these in place, then can you capture in price a fair share of the value that you're creating for your customers through pricing. And again, it depends on your pricing strategy, whether you're capturing 10% or 30% of the value created, but it needs to be a fair share, and the value needs to be communicated to the customer, and the value needs to be accepted and acknowledged by the customer, and you have to deliver on your value promise. Now, this is a cycle simply because value creation isn't once and done. It doesn't end here with capturing part of it through price. There has to be a commitment to ongoing value creation for the stakeholders over the lifetime of the customer. So, of course, value-based pricing has to start with value. Now, value might seem like an arbitrary concept, but it is not. It is not abstract at all. Before we delve into pricing itself, we must understand value. Right. Value drivers are how your customer gets value, as I said before, emotional, economic, community, and each category is unique. It is powerful and it is very important. And it lends this lens by which to segment your market, and it's a critical input into your pricing model. So the value drivers then determine the value metric. Again, as I said before, a value metric is how the user gets value. And your pricing metric is the unit by which you charge. And it must be in alignment with this value metric, how you're creating value for the customer. So this may seem a bit abstract. So I'll give you an example. So a really great example of a pricing metric that is in alignment with the value that the user derives is the pricing metric click per, what do you call it? Again, price per click for online advertisements, right? And Google used this price per click metric really, really well. They didn't invent it, but they were able to capitalize in on it. So before, for online advertisements, before the price per click pricing model, and it used to be priced by impressions. Now, as a user, as a buyer, impressions really doesn't add that much value to you. What you want to know is, right? What you want to know is what ads or search terms are attractive. And if you're just getting charged by impressions, it really doesn't track the value that is being created for you. Now, when Google moved to the price per click model, it was revolutionary because it is per click that creates value for the buyer, right? It lends a lens into what ads or search terms are attractive to them, and they're willing to pay for that. So then by expanding this diagram, the value metric, value driver, value metric, and pricing metric connection, when we expand this diagram, we can see how the metrics feed into the larger structure. Everything in value-based pricing is linked back to value drivers, and properly assigning value metrics and pricing metrics is a crucial step in pricing. Now, you would have to have confirmation of the value drivers for your customer base, and this is done through in-depth market segmentation, where you validate value drivers, and you also get an understanding of the target segments buying processes. Now, when you have validated the value drivers, you understand the value metric, and you have assigned pricing metrics, this is where science meets art, right? In general terms, this is where you create the pricing model. And in general terms, a pricing model is the design of the pricing metrics, fencing, and packaging. So when we say packaging is the function that one includes in their offer, right? So you have an offer, you will have a pricing metric assigned to that offer, and you would then have to decide What are the functions that you are going to include in this offer? Packages are often designed and should be designed for specific segments. You don't have to provide all functions for all segments. And what you want to do is give each segment the offer that maximizes the differentiated value of your offer and value you provide while minimizing your customer acquisition costs and the cost to serve that particular segment. So you don't want to give everybody everything. So that would be part of your packaging design. Now, what you would also include is fences. So what are fences? Fences are what guide a potential customer to the offer that best suits them. You may have various offers for various segments. And you want to be able to guide your potential customer to the offer that best suits them. You should offer to the segments value that they care about, and don't spend time and money and energy delivering on value to a segment that they're not going to care deeply about. So some examples of fences include functionality. So for different packages, pricing packages and different offers, you can have specific functionality, you can have volume restrictions, you can have role restrictions. So those are some examples of pricing fences. Next. So let's take a deeper dive into what factors into value-based pricing, namely economic, emotional, and community value drivers. And what you also want to look at is the differentiated value that your offer is creating for the customer next to the customer's next best competitive alternative relative to the customer's next best alternative. So I will now pass the talking stick over to Jessie, and she will walk us through value drivers as well as differentiation and market segmentation.
Great. Thank you, Rashaka. That was a really great overview of pricing. And as mentioned, we're going to focus a bit more on value drivers. So as Rashaka has repeatedly said, value is really the core and the foundation of pricing. So before we go any further into pricing strategies and all that fun stuff, we have to really nail down value. So in order to do so, we can introduce value drivers, which was mentioned before. And value drivers is basically how your customers or potential customers perceive or obtain value. And the reason why it's so important is that we start with value, which allows us to create our market segmentation, which leads to our value-based pricing, which leads to our market strategy, and in the end, our value-based sales. So as Rashaka mentioned, without value, there really isn't anything to price. So in order to help us visualize and think about values and how to quantify them, we can introduce 3 frameworks that we currently at Ibica use as a guideline. Okay, so the first one is emotional value. So here we introduce Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that pyramid some of you may be familiar with. So as you can see at the bottom, that's the very basic operations. And as you move up to the top of the pyramid, those are needs more around the self. So at the bottom with basic operations, that could be things like business process, just general efficiency and effectiveness. Above that is security, so things around safety and compliance that might be important to your customers or potential customers. Above that is community value drivers, and we'll actually expand on this particular segment a bit more. But yeah, that's more about the sense of belonging a customer may have. Above that is more the self needs, and this is where like the highlight is. So that would be self-esteem. So that could be a sense of confidence in one's job or confidence in one's role. And at the top is self-actualization. So that could be, for example, pride in your work and things like that. And as you can see with that arrow on the side, as you move up these needs in the pyramid, you acquire more pricing power. So that's why it's really important to categorize and just identify where these may fall for your potential customers. And if you find any of these value drivers resonate with you, feel free to take note as we finish covering this value driver segment, we'll have a brief discussion on them. So as I mentioned, we wanted to expand a bit more on community value drivers. So as you can see here in this table, it's less of a hierarchy and more of a collection of subtopics. So starting at the top is social impact. So that's just a general description of what a community value driver may be. So that idea of a society as a whole and just sense of belonging in general. And as we go through the other ones, we can see how impactful and powerful these subtopics are, and actually they interconnect and almost strengthen each other, we may find. So the following that is health and well-being. So of course, that's extremely relevant today. That's just like the physical, mental, and social well-being of society. Um, After that is rights and freedom. And again, especially given, this year and current events, this is an extremely powerful community value driver. So that could be just, the basic human rights or even fighting for more equality. And we find that this can vary between different industries or different countries. But again, there's that strong drive for basic freedoms. And following that is the security and safety. So you may remember that this was also in the other pyramid for the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is more of the collective safety. So protection from harm or things like natural disasters and things like that. Following that is societal advancement. So this is a very key one as it's more the improvements of all these categories. So really moving forward to elevate these drivers and just improve each of these categories. And another key community value driver is education. So like society advancements, it's interconnected with these other topics, so very important, and can be seen paired with these other subtopics. So, providing things like education, knowledge, improvements, things like that can strengthen a lot of these other community value drivers. And lastly is environment and sustainability. So that's just, having a positive impact on the environment, promoting things like sustainability as and other things like conservation initiatives. So as you can see, these are very powerful and connected drivers. So us at IBICA decided to kind of draw these out, as before we weren't using these as much, but we found that these were extremely powerful and useful when you're thinking about segmentation and pricing. And then the last category for value drivers is economic value. So here we actually introduce economic value estimation, or EVE, and this is an approach introduced by Tom Nagel, and this comes from his pricing book called Strategy and Tactics of Pricing. And at IBICA, we kind of use that as a Bible. So if you're interested in just learning about pricing in general, we highly recommend this book. But just with EVE is that by using your positive or identifying your positive and your negative economic value drivers, you can find that differentiated value that Rajaka emphasized at our introduction. So the idea is that once you identify your differentiated value, that's normally where your normal price range will be. And you can see that on the diagram there with the green indicating the positive economic value drivers, and you would subtract your negative economic value drivers to find that price range. But one key thing that was mentioned by Rajaka as well was that all of this is in comparison to your next best alternative. And I'll highlight that a bit later in the slides. But first, we can go ahead and expand on what are some examples of positive economic value drivers. So here are the listed 6. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just go through them and some examples. So the first positive economic value driver would just be to increase revenues. So, something to do with your market size or increasing market share, or even just improving general pipeline that could be related to increasing your revenues. Following this is decreasing your operating expenses. So an example could be reducing employee costs or recruiting costs and things like that, or even administration costs. And next we have decreasing operating capital. So an example could be just reducing inventory or just faster collections on accounts receivables and such. Following this, we have decreased capital investment. So this could be getting more productivity out of your existing assets or just deferring capital investments in general. Following this, we have decrease in risk. So this is a bit general, but this could mean financial risk or security risk, things like that. So a good example of a decreased risk value driver is just having better compliance. And lastly, we have increased options. So for this value driver, some examples would just be, having more packages or having more solutions or increasing benefits, things like that. So just more options. So that covers the positive economic value drivers, and we can move on to identify and describe what a negative value driver may be. So this is a bit more straightforward. We describe a negative economic value driver as your shortcomings basically. So as mentioned before, this is related to your next best alternative or the competitors in the space. Because if everyone has the same shortcomings, you're not technically a shortcoming. It's just in that industry. And related to this, if your company or product or /service offering has any unique costs. So for example, that could be a unique switching cost that you have that your alternatives do not have or your competitors do not have. So that again emphasizes that when you're thinking about all these value drivers, you need to also be comparing to your next best alternatives. Okay, so I think that wraps up for the economic value driver side. And actually that wraps up the section on value drivers. So we would like to open it up to if anyone in the audience has any examples or comments on these topics that we just introduced, feel free to put stuff in the comments. I don't think I can see them, or you can even unmute or raise a hand. Let me see if I can open the comments. I don't think I can see it. Rashaka, can you see any of the comments? There's any.
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, I can't open them.
Yeah, don't see any direct questions in now, but if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself, ask your question. Good old-fashioned way.
Yeah, as if we're in a real presentation.
Yeah.
There is one question from Victoria in the comments. She's asking if the slides will be available after the meeting.
Yeah, usually we have those available. So
yeah, we can share these slides.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, so just to sort of riff on this a bit, this is Stephen. I work with Jesse and Rashaka. I've worked with rocket builders and have done due diligence on many companies in BC, and we find that the area that people struggle with most is segmentation. And often people say, well, our market segment is a medium-sized enterprise in the fast food space located in the Lower Mainland. And that is a terrible definition of a segment. As Jesse and Rashaka have indicated, a segment is really defined by value, how people get value and how you can deliver value to them. And if you don't understand and you can't separate your market out by value, then you don't really have an actionable segmentation. Mm-hmm. People really, really struggle with this. And if you want to really wow your evaluators in New Ventures BC, nail your segmentation. Mm-hmm. Almost guarantees you get on to the next round, I would think. But
can you just repeat what you just said? Sorry. A segment is defined by that was
a segment. So a segment is a group of potential customers who get value in the same way and who buy in the same way. Mm-hmm. And in early stage stuff, like most of the people on this presentation, it also really helps if the segment is, if the people in the segment reference each other. Mm-hmm. So that you can get this sort of positive feedback and buzz going. That's not always possible and it's not necessary, but it really helps. So did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay,
I think Tony's got a question which he wants to ask, and then we've got a few in the chat we'll go to.
Yeah. quick question. My question is for B2C, how much premium are people, from a consumer perspective, are willing to put to value? So, to put some context to it, sometimes, people believe in some ideals. Maybe it could be social impact, it could be community, it could be emotional. But how do you, so my question is, at what point, because there's, sort of an argument from different perspectives in terms of that sometimes people put a value to something, but may not be willing to put their money to match that, in quote, value that they put in something. So how do you, in that case, bridge that gap where you say, for example, you have a consumer saying this is important from an emotional point of view, from a value point of view. However, when it comes to point of pain, in which case you are now trying to monetize it by way of pricing, the same person doesn't check up in terms of what they have live up to that expectation that they've set as a standard. So that's my question based on value and emotional that you've talked about.
Do you want me to try that, Jesse and Rashaka?
Oh yeah,
if you want
go
to.
ahead.
Sure, okay. So let me sort of restate the point. So many people say they have a value, and let's focus on community values here, because emotional value is a very different thing. And so let's focus on the community values here, and it could be sustainability. It's a great and very common example now. So many of us say that being green and sustainable is very important to us. But when we actually get to the cash register, we are not willing to pay a premium for a green product, and we just go for the cheapest thing. So that is absolutely a frequent behavior. And my answer to that would be, if you cannot actually observe the impact of the value on willingness to pay, then the person, as far as pricing concerned, does not really have that value. So we are interested in values when they actually impact willingness to pay. Just claiming to have a value is not enough to make it meaningful in the context of pricing. Now, Ivica works mostly in the B2B space, but we have definitely seen cases in both B2C and B2B where the integration of community value drivers such as sustainability have a significant, and by significant I mean a 10 to 20% impact on the price premium that you can charge. So this is a real, this is a real thing, and it is getting more and more important day to day. And the way that we think of these these value drivers is that they're multiplicative, not additive. So if any one of these is zero, then the total value is going to be zero. And that's perhaps a bit of an overstatement, but we can actually see that in the data that we have on a fairly wide range. Now, granted, our customers are mostly in the media and software and hardware business, so it's sort of a limited data set, but we can actually see this in our data.
Yeah, and just to jump in here, Stephen, I think we have probably time for these last two questions. So the first one is asking to elaborate a bit more on the security value driver in context for pricing. So I can give an example of why security is actually a very strong value driver in some industries. So for example, there is a client that we worked with that specializes in regulations of elevators or even roller coasters. So as you can see, security for them is number one, and safety for them is number one. And things like basic operations and just other things that are lower in that pyramid might not be as important to them and their segmentation. So that's one example of security. And another question we have here is emotional and community value drivers even important in B2B selling? Because if there are no economic value drivers, the deal doesn't go through, question mark. So we've been finding with a lot of our clients, I think sometimes they think economic value drivers is the baseline and that's all people care about. But in reality, when we do our research and we do our segmentation, a lot of it stands on those baselining emotional and community value drivers. But again, with discretion, this depends on the particular industry, because some of our clients, again, they do value the economic, and when we do research, it does rely heavily on those values. But in other cases, like example with the regulations for safety, they had more emotional and community value drivers as their customers, that's what they valued, and we were able to package and price. So I think there's some other questions in the chat, but I think for time purposes, we'll need to move on. But Stephen, if you want to read those, I think some of them you could answer, but I will go
Yes,
on.
sorry, there's a couple people with their hands up.
Okay.
Do you want them to wait till the end?
Yeah, if you could type it in chat, because I just want to be cognizant of time. Hopefully we can answer all the questions at the end, but feel free to put it in chat. Stephen might be able to respond to them through text. Okay, so I'll go on to the next slide here, which is, as Stephen mentioned, is about differentiation and segmentation. So that's the critical part of pricing. So we can actually revisit this economic value driver diagram and introduce the Venn diagram here. So we can see the top circle is the customer needs, and it also includes your offer as well as the importance of the alternative and your competitive alternative. So anything that is in the top section of the circle is an unmet need. So that could be a potential for you and your alternative. And on the flip side, anything that falls within the overlap section is a commodity. But with commodities, as it suggests, the price is actually commoditized and is set by market forces rather than you and your alternative. But what's really crucial here is that in this section here, where it's something that you offer that your customer needs, but is not covered by your alternative. And this, as Rishaka mentioned, and Stephen also mentioned, is your differentiation. So again, this is where your pricing power comes from. And this is your key spot you care about so much. And on the flip side, anything that your alternative or competitor offers that you do not offer, but is a customer need, is their differentiation. And that's something you want to be cognizant of and aware of at all times. And anything in the bottom sections there is just irrelevant functionality. So yeah, now you can see that with this mapped out in the Venn diagram, the importance of differentiation and how that ties back to pricing power. So now to kind of move on to segmentation. When some people think about segmentation, they just think of demographics, and that is the way to do it. But here at Ibica, we find demographics just, a very simple and just common form of segmentation. But then when you begin to ask yourself important questions such as, is it true that do firms of similar size and similar industry, or even in the same country and region, do they all buy in the same way? And when we ask those questions, in our heads, we know that's false. And we know that would fail if we continued with that mindset. So to kind of help us understand why demographics often fail, we can have this very short example here. So here we have these descriptions or demographics of two potential customers. So, they live in a castle, they're very wealthy, they're 72 years old of age, and they care about your family. So you could think, oh, this is descriptive, it paints a picture of what this customer might be, what they might like. But we can reveal that, Ozzy Osbourne and Prince Charles are in the same segmentation if you were to rely on demographics. And in a selling and pricing and packaging standpoint, that would be a total failure. It would not fly at all. So given that, we can see that just relying on demographics would not be good. So that's why we have to tie everything back to value and not just rely on demographics when it comes to segmentation. So just generally, the reason why we care so much about segmentation, I think Stephen brought this up before, but the goal here with a good segmentation is to collect similar customers that are in groups in order to simplify your marketing, your sales, your support, and your pricing. Because all these customers or all these companies and potential customers in the same segment should behave in similar ways as well as respond to similar value propositions. So kind of give just like a very introduction of how you might segment or even begin to think about tying value to segmentation. A great way to start is to make any spreadsheet or any table. So you can see in that example in the bottom right table where we have the emotional value drivers as well as the economic, and you can begin just going through your CRM or just doing your research and trying to map out all those plot points and seeing if there's any patterns or potential to start segmenting based off that table or graph. And then following that, you can also tie those segments to your sales, marketing, and support, and that's identified in the top table there. That's just a very general introduction to first thoughts about segmentation, but obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. But just to tie it up, we can think about these three main points when we think of what good segmentation is. So when we think of good segmentation, we know that it's actually bringing together companies that, one, they buy in the same way, two, that they get value in the same way as identified with those emotional, economic, and community value drivers we were in that table or in your spreadsheet that you might use. And lastly, a good segmentation will bring together companies that will act as reference for each other. So that's especially good if you're launching a new product offer. If you see some potential or some customers in one segment acting a certain way, you can see if others will follow, especially if you've already grouped them in the same segment based on your value drivers. So as you can see with this differentiation and segmentation, this is two very crucial steps before we even think about pricing strategy. But now that we kind of have a good gist of those two concepts, we can think about pricing strategies and pricing models, which will be in our next section. So Rishaka, I'll hand it off to you to cover the pricing core concepts.
Thank you, Jessie. So next slide, please. So at this point in time in the presentation, I believe you've all internalized that pricing is key. And just for a good measure, I'm just going to say it again. Pricing is where it all comes together. It brings together how you're creating value, who you're selling to, how you're communicating value, and how you capture value. So this pricing puts all the different various pieces together. Next. So now, pricing can support many different goals, but it cannot do everything at the same time. For good pricing, it has to be focused on achieving one or maybe two goals, right? So here are some examples of goals, pricing goals. You can have category goals where you want to expand an existing category, or you want to win market share in an existing category, so basically getting a bigger share of the pie. You can have P&L goals. You want to drive volume, you want to drive grow revenues, you want to improve gross profits, or maybe you want to optimize cash flows. And then there are unit economic goals, improving the lifetime value of the customer, reducing churn, reducing customer acquisition costs, or you can also have facility utilization goals and this can have a big impact on your costs. Now, before you even decide, sorry, go back. Previous slide, please, Jessie. So, but it is very critical that as an organization, you are aligned on the pricing goal that you're hoping to achieve, right? As an organization, you need to take a step back and question, what are your winning aspirations, right? Based on your market segmentation, who's your target segment? Where do you want to play? And that is when your pricing strategy and how to win strategies fit into achieving those winning aspirations. Now, we see this quite often. Organizations, there are various stakeholders within an organization, and not everybody is aligned on what the exact pricing goal should be. So it is very critical that before you even get into pricing strategies and focus on one or two of these goals that you are wanting to focus on as an organization, you are aligned, because pricing, good pricing, cannot be executed in a silo, and the various stakeholders within the organization, marketing, sales, finance, they all need to come together to make this a success, pricing a success, and there has to be alignment on the pricing goals. Next up. So there are three basic pricing strategies: skimming or premium. This is where you charge the maximum price that your pricing power allows. And often this is done in order to invest heavily in continuing innovation and value creation for your customers. Then there is market following, where you're pricing relative to a market leader or an incumbent. And then there is penetration pricing, where you price as low as possible and to grow the overall market or to increase category share. A company that does this really well is Procter and Gamble. Next up. So there are four basic pricing models. Now everyone is familiar with cost plus. It is very well understood. It ensures profit, of course. If you are adding to your costs, it generally ensures profits, but it also generally tends to underprice, right? Especially if you have a differentiated offer and you are going for a cost plus pricing method, odds are you are going to be leaving money on the table, and you're not going to be exercising your pricing power. But it is a good strategy. I mean, a good method, especially when the client controls the deliverables. And when the client controls the deliverables, it does have quite a bit of impact on your costs. And those instances, cost plus pricing is a good method to have. An example would be military contracts. For those ones, they have very high standards for delivery, and that does impact the costs of delivery. So, and they're rather unpredictable. So within those circumstances, cost plus is a good pricing method. Then there is market following. It is very passive, it is responsive to market, and it really doesn't reflect value. Now, if you have differentiated value, this is not a good pricing method to have at all. However, if you do not have differentiated value and you're pricing for a commoditized offer, then market following is, in that case, a good pricing method. Then there is input-based pricing. It is responsive to market and shows an understanding of the customer business. Input-based pricing is when the market is sensitive to external variables like energy prices or interest rates. And this makes it quite unpredictable for both the buyer and the seller. A good example of industries that rely heavily on input-based pricing is the energy sector and the financial market. And then to the topic at hand, which is value-based pricing. Of course, we are big proponents of value-based pricing. We believe very, very deeply in value-based pricing, and it is the most flexible. It supports different pricing strategies. But of course, as you have seen over the course of this presentation, that it does require quite a bit of upfront investment in terms of time and money, and it requires a deep understanding of your customer business. So you have to take a step back and do an in-depth market segmentation and really get to the core of how you're creating value, and that might impact your product roadmap as well in terms of where you're going to go with the product. And you might have to step back a little bit and say how you can create more differentiated value for your customer and capture that fairly through price. So when your offer is differentiated, value-based pricing is definitely the way to go. We can skip over this one because we've covered this before. Again, the value metric, the pricing metric has to track the value metric. So the unit by which you charge must be based on how the customer is deriving value. So what goes into a pricing model? Right? A pricing model, so what is being priced? So there you will have the pricing metric, the unit by which you're charging. You will have the fences, as discussed before, that guides the buyer to the right offer, especially if you have multiple offers. Also, what you will need to have in place is pricing guide rails and discounting policies. Guide rails, as Jesse mentioned, is the range within which you can price, right? The range within which you can have pricing power. That is your guide rails. And you also have to have some discipline around discounting. Now, through value-based pricing, you want to fairly capture as much of the value that you create for your customer, right? And if you are able to zoom in into exactly how you're creating value for the customer, and you're able to effectively communicate that value to your customers, and they're accepting of that value, then you don't have to discount as much. But there are certain instances. Discounting is not always bad. It will not always erode value, as long as you're cognizant of how much value you're creating and you're not discounting ad hoc. Discounting is not always bad. Sometimes it is actually, even within the B2B setting, sometimes it may be even expected, right? There might be an expectation from procurement. Other times you might be in a channel setting where you have distribution partners and it is an expectation. But as long as it is not ad hoc, you are operating within your pricing guide rails, and you have policies in place that determine just how much you can discount, you are going to be in a good place. Then your off pricing model might have tiered offers, right? You have to have a good understanding of what the functions are of these various tiers. What are you looking to achieve through these tiers? Tiers may have different functionalities. Are you looking to upsell? You have to determine what percentage of your revenue should come from each of these tiers. Again, sometimes you may even have say a premium tier that is mainly used for framing and guiding your buyers to the tier where you're actually targeting. So tiers have different functionalities, and you need to be able to design your pricing such that you are guiding your potential customers to the right tiers as per the pricing goal that you are looking to achieve. So far we've been talking about pricing, new to market innovations, but pricing in itself can be an innovator. And I want to share an example with you. And this is so interesting because pricing itself can be so innovative. So GE and Rolls-Royce, jet engine manufacturers, they had invested heavily into the development of jet engines such that they would reduce the burden of maintenance. And they were looking to capture the returns from this innovation through higher prices. But what happened was airlines were not buying it, and they were not willing to pay a higher price for engines because they were not buying that there would be lower maintenance costs. So what they did was they completely changed their pricing model, and they, instead of selling the jet engines to the airlines, they decided to go with a power by the hour pricing model. This is a very good example of a pricing metric, because what airlines want more than anything is to have their fleet operational. If the fleet is grounded, they're losing money. And by doing this, they were able, by then moving from a sale-based to a lease-based pricing model, pricing by the hour, they were able to increase the willingness to pay for the airlines, and it connect, again, the value metric, how the buyer is how you're creating value for the buyer to how you're pricing. And more importantly, this is also really great, and this is where emotional value comes in, right? They were able to share the risk with the buyer as well, right? The perceived risk, because instead of buying, you're now leasing, and you're only getting charged for the hours that the jet is operational. So this is an example of a really, really good emotional value driver as well. Like that. So now for the next little bit of the presentation, what we'll do is we will be focusing on pricing within the context of Roger Moore's technology adoption lifecycle. For those of you who are not aware, how this works is, over the life cycle of a technology, from early life introduction to end of life, it passes through different buyer groups: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and finally laggards. Now, pricing has very important transition points across the technology adoption lifecycle. The key thing to remember here is that the buyer's reasons for buying changes across the life cycle. And as the reasons to buy change, so do the value drivers, and that in turn has an impact on the buyer's willingness to pay. So you need to be able to understand these transitions, and you also have to be quite honest about where your offer or technology solution is within this technology lifecycle. So now, at the very beginning, innovators tend not to pay for solutions. They're buying because there's something new in the market, and they're not really concerned with the business value. So they tend to have a very, very low willingness to pay, and they're not going to be moved by economic arguments. However, and this is important, innovators do influence the early adopters of the technology. Now, when you go to early adopters are buying to get a unique competitive advantage, right? They're looking for a singular set of value drivers that apply only to them. So you would generally have to have a very good understanding of the business of early adopters, and then you would have to tailor the solution to the needs of these unique needs of these early adopters. But on the flip side, which is really great, even though you are going to have to tailor your solution, they do have a very high willingness to pay for a competitive advantage. Now, when we move past early adopters and we've crossed the chasm into early majority, now you're going to be faced with bowling alley buyers. So bowling alley buyers are buyers who are trying to stay competitive within their own market. Own verticals, that is, right? They care most about what their direct competitors are doing, and they will buy if they see their competitors buying. So they're going to respond to value drivers that are directly applicable to the mechanics of their own business, but their willingness to pay is generally lower than those of early adopters. Now, when we go past the bowling alley into the tornado buyers, this is when verticals start referencing each other, and Jesse mentioned that before as well. Tornado buyers see the solution of the cost as a cost of doing business, and when you see something as the cost of doing business, your willingness to pay is going to be very low, right? So the willingness to pay of tornado buyers is less than that of bowling alley buyers. But the other thing is there tends to be a lot more of them too in the market. So very few companies survive the transition from bowling alley to tornado. This is when the value drivers in the tornado market, you are now appealing to a mass market, so your value drivers become quite generic, so do your marketing messaging. So when we go past tornado into late majority, right? This is when an incumbent would then typically be appealing to the mass market. Prices are generally low, or charged lower, but there are late majority buyers who are in the market who tend to have a very, very good understanding of their own value drivers, and they have very tried and tested value drivers, right? This leaves the door open for new innovators to come in, who can develop targeted solutions for very specific markets, and they can actually tap into the subsegment within the market of late majority who have a high willingness to pay. So if you are an incumbent within the market, you may want to position yourself so that you're targeting tighter niches, or you might just get priced out at this point. And then at the very end is laggards. Laggards are at the tail end of the technology life cycles, and they don't buy technology solutions. They buy solutions that they're very familiar with and that they already have. So the strategy at this point in time, if you're within this market, would be then to bundle it into other solutions that they already have. So bundling is the way to go. But then again, there are some other options, right? You may have a legacy solution that at the end of life, you may charge a premium Or maybe you have a legacy solution that there is no support available for and everyone else is getting out of the market. So depending on what your strategy is towards the tail end of the life cycle, you might want to milk it and charge premium, or you might just want to bundle with other offers. So just have to be cognizant of this being the tail end of the technology life cycle. So what you have to be aware of is when a market will go through these different transition points, you need to be aware of it. You need to prepare for it because your price, the value drivers are going to be very different. Your pricing strategy will also have to change with the value drivers. So if you're, for instance, pushing for horizontal value drivers in a mass market too soon, then you're going to stall out and leave money on the table, and you're going to reduce your pricing power before your time. Or if you stay with them too long, that might also become a recipe for disaster, right? So if you are in a tornado market and you're appealing to the mass market for a longer time, then you will fizzle out in the end as other innovators come into the market. Next step. Okay, so as we have shown over the course of this presentation, pricing is such a critical lever, and it really does matter to investors. And if you do follow a value-based methodology, you're really putting yourself in a better position to attract investors. So market segmentation demonstrates your understanding of your market opportunity. You get a good understanding of the patterns of needs, attitudes, behaviors. You're able to identify your differentiated value. And of course, the market segmentation studies underpin the calculation of the market size, which is something investors really care about. Customer targeting also shows that you've identified your most attractive segments, which means you're also able to prioritize your financial and marketing investments, and you're able to understand your customers' buying process, so you're better prepared. Next up. Of course, you have to make sure that again, your offer is unique and different, and you have a differentiated value proposition, because the more differentiated your value proposition is, the better positioned you are to realize your potential earnings. And of course, your differentiation is always relative to the customer's next best competitive alternative. So investors would want you to also have done your competitive analysis. And in value-based pricing work, competitive analysis plays a key role right next to market. When you're doing your market segmentation studies, you also have to see what the competitive landscape looks like, and that is where your differentiation comes into play. You also have to do some market sizing studies because it provides an indication of your potential earnings. Market sizing is a combination, of course, of market segmentation as well as statistics. So again, market segmentation is critical here. And industry statistics as well. So it provides an indication of your potential earnings. So you have to look at what the total addressable market is based on your target audience, then what is the serviceable addressable market, and of course, which markets you can realistically obtain within the serviceable addressable market. And that, again, the sum will justify your valuation. Of course, we cannot reiterate it enough. Pricing is not once and done. Value is fluid, the market is fluid. So you'd have to continuously monitor the pricing acceptance. You would also have to put in effort and value communication to guide behavior across the pricing tiers. And of course, the market is fluid, so you'd have to be prepared for competitive positioning, and any changes in the competitive landscape will have an impact on value drivers' willingness to pay and what the customer deems as the next best competitive alternative. Again, you're going to have to demonstrate some quantitative evidence of market demand, that is customer attraction, and that is the validation that value is being created. And so this has to be done on an ongoing basis to see how you're creating value, if you're consistently creating value, whether there is opportunity to create added value, so on and so forth. So value-based pricing can create and capture value for all. You can create and capture value for the customers. And of course, it has to be fair pricing. And of course, you have to create value for your investors and all your stakeholders. Pricing, at the end of the day, is where your marketing strategy gets real, because you and your customer need to agree on a price to win a sale. Next step. So we did cover quite a number of concepts during the course of this presentation, and we know that it is quite a bit to digest. However, we do have a self-assessment tool. This is the IBICA self-assessment tool, and it's no strings attached. We wanted to give you the tools to think through what your current strategy is around pricing, segmentation, how you're creating value, how you're thinking about value, and you can take these 3 short assessments and you will get a scorecard, and based on your scorecard you will also get a personalized report telling you what you're doing well and where there are opportunities for improvement. Again, there are no strings attached. It's just to get you started on the value-based pricing process. Thank you. And now we do have a little bit of time. We can open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, I think there are a couple in the chat. Stephen, I don't know if you're answering them through messaging.
Trying to.
Okay, because I don't know if you want to switch over to
Very
just
long.
verbalizing them since.
I need to switch to that, but let me finish typing what I'm typing now while you guys answer. Go ahead.
Okay.
Jesse, it looks like Michelle's got her hand up if you maybe want to start with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, how do you go? I mean, I understand that price is based on value. However, it's also based on willingness to pay. So I'm still having a really hard time understanding how maybe someone might create a value, but might not be willing to pay. So yeah, especially right now in times of COVID, for instance, that everybody having a really hard time economically, how can you penetrate in that sense?
Stephen, would you like to take that, or do you?
I was typing. Okay, so let me see if I can summarize what I think I heard. So what's the difference between, so value and willingness to pay are not the same thing. So generally speaking, one has to create significantly more value than you can capture back in price. And there are factors that influence willing to pay that are not really related to value. So let me give some examples. So you mentioned that right now, sorry, just a second. So right now, under COVID, many people are under constrained incomes. So regardless of how much value you're creating, their willingness to pay is going to be depressed because they simply don't have the ability to pay. So I might recognize the value of a $20,000 carbon road racing bicycle, but my willingness to pay for any bicycle is much, much lower than that. But there's a number of other things that impact your ability to capture price through willingness to pay. So for example, companies with very strong brands will generally generate a much higher willingness to pay relative to value. Unfortunately, that works against most of us in the early stage economy because we tend not to have strong brands. Another thing that impacts willingness to pay relative to value is if you are only a small part of the overall solution, willingness to pay relative to value tends to be higher. Another one that comes up quite frequently is when the buyer is able to pass through your cost. So you may have noticed if you've been that your lawyers charge you a fortune for any photocopies that they make for you. So lawyers tend to have a very high willingness to pay for photocopies because they are able to pass through the cost to another person. So a lot of people confuse willingness to pay and value, and that really, really prevents them from coming up with good pricing strategies and understanding how to position themselves and market themselves.
Okay, and probably my following to that question, mentioning the graph from pricing stages. So early adopters have a smaller willingness to pay. Sorry, innovators have a smaller willingness to pay than early adopters. So I just want to know, how do you go through from innovators to early adopters in that sense? Yeah.
That is a great question, and it is extremely difficult because innovate. So that the critical people here are early adopters, right? That's the people you have to get to. Innovators are nice, but they are nice because they can give you good feedback and because they can lead to early adopters. So almost every industry has well-known early adopters. And part of your job is to figure out who they are. So how do you do that? Well, one way is to look at industry conferences. Early adopters tend to like talking. Not all of them, but many of them like to get up on stage and talk about how smart they are and what wonderful new solutions they've discovered. Again, it's not every early adopter is like that. Some of them actually are secretive, but the secretive ones are hard to find. So one thing is to really pay close attention to who's speaking at conferences. I know that's not a very good strategy during COVID because you can't go and buttonhole them later. But you can get to them through LinkedIn. You can start conversations. You can start doing a lot of content marketing. Early adopters are always out there looking. So early adopters are far more susceptible to your content marketing efforts than are people in the bowling alley. So those are really some of the tactics that they can use. Some innovators know who the early adopters are and are willing to tell you, but not always. So I'm not sure if I'm helping you or just sort of explaining why this is going to be hard, but it's not easy, and it's part of the skill that you bring as an entrepreneur, but also that you're going to be looking for advisors that can help you with this.
Okay, and also I'm trying to put all the points together in terms of consistency. I remember you guys mentioned consistency at the beginning. So how can you follow consistency when every single segment, or like innovators, early adopters, or majority, have a different willingness to pay? So that means that your price has to fluctuate depending on the stage you are, right?
Oh, sorry, Michelle. I'm gonna have to cut you off just to see if there's other questions, because we've only got about 10 minutes left. If we don't have any questions, though, I'll get Stephen to circle back on you there.
And we're happy to answer offline too, so you can reach out to us.
And for those listening, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I see lots of people saying thanks. So, all right. So I don't know, Jesse, if there are other questions or
I've started to answer the one about what are some concrete examples of vertical value drivers versus horizontal value drivers.
Okay.
So first of all, just note, may somebody in this presentation be blessed by having to worry about being in a tornado market. Most of us will never get into a company that's in a tornado market. And you can have very successful companies that never experience a tornado market. So if you are on this call, the odds are that you are worried about either finding early adopters and pricing your beta for early adopters, or crossing the chasm and getting into the bowling alley. You are probably not worried about being in a tornado market. If you were in a tornado market, you would be too busy to be here. However, having said that, so the value drivers in the bowling alley have to be narrowly targeted at very, very specific persona. So let's imagine that you were creating an educational application. You would start by looking at a very, very narrow opportunity. Maybe it's based just on one role for one industry, and really nailing that and doing that exceptionally well, and then picking an adjacent role or an adjacent industry and sort of spreading out through the bowling alley that way. But you keep everything very, 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 very tightly focused. Then maybe your approach to learning catches on generally, so that everybody wants the flavor of learning that you're offering. In that case, you're probably going to need to flip what you're doing so that you are offering content that is relevant to people in lots of different roles, so that you can scale very, very quickly. And the way you price for the narrow, highly targeted content versus that widely applicable content is likely to be quite different. And this can apply in many, many different things. So maybe you've got a new way of doing 3D printing that creates parts that are much more durable. Rather than trying to find everybody in the world who cares about durable parts, you find a very narrow segment where you can really, really excel. But your particular approach creates exceptional value. But then if you're incredibly smart and determined and lucky, and frankly, getting into a tornado market has an element of luck to it, then you're going to need to change how you think about your value drivers and your pricing. But again, I would not be worried too much about that right now. We have a client that we're just starting with in Washington, D.C. And that's what they said. They said, oh, analysts are telling us that our segment is going to be flipping into a tornado market anytime now. And I said, well, maybe, but analysts are sometimes wrong. And if you try to price for the tornado market before you enter it, you're likely to fail. So start with very deeply defined segmentations. Be very, very choiceful about who you target as your customers, and design and price for that narrow bowling alley. And then if you pick off enough pins, you'll have a very successful business. And if the sector you're in happens to stumble into a tornado, which does happen, I mean, it's happened to CRMs, to marketing automation, to social media. It's happened in lots of places. Then you'll be playing a very different game.
All right, we have maybe time for one more question, if we have any. I'm not sure, Jesse, if
You're
you
letting Rashaka and Jesse answer. I'm going to be quiet.
I'm trying to see if there's anything in the chat that we missed, but I think, Stephen, you did a pretty good job of responding to most of them. But if anyone else has any last questions, if not, I think we could go back to that previous question from Michelle. But if anyone, feel free to raise your hand. If not, oh, I think there is a hand raised. So
is it Ngana? You can go ahead.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for your presentation. I really wanted any of you could just throw some light on what's the difference between an innovator and an early adopter.
Yes, that's easy. Innovators buy stuff because it's cool and exciting and new. Early adopters buy because it is going to give them a business advantage.
Okay. Could you give an example?
Sure. I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. So some years ago, a group of us bought a business unit out of Monitor Group, which is a large consulting firm now part of Deloitte, but it was a software business that actually did value-based pricing. And we went around and we talked to all of the smartest pricing people we could find. And they all said, this is fantastic. It's a great idea. We love it. So we said, oh, that's good. So we went and we, invested our money and we built the software. And then we went back to all these innovators and we said, great, so we've built it. Now, we want you to pay to use it. They went, oh, no, we're experts. We'll use your software because we're really smart, and because we're using it, that will help you, but we're not going to pay for it. So we're kind of thinking, oh my God, we're screwed. But then we found the head of marketing at a major building materials company who was just joined as the chief marketing officer and wanted to transform how they did marketing and pricing to based on value. And she was willing to invest $800,000 to get a version of the platform that really served her purposes.
Okay.
We thought, this is fantastic. We're going to be incredibly rich. Because if she pays $800,000 for it, just think of all the other people that look like her, and they'll all pay $800,000, and we're getting ready to buy our yachts. And but then we transitioned from this woman who was an early adopter, and we had a couple of other early adopters, and they were all paying in the sort of $600,000 to $800,000 for an annual subscription range. And we got into the bowling alley, and we actually had our first sort of really scalable success in the industrial chemical market. And most industrial chemical companies use that software now. But the price that they pay went down from $800,000 to about $60,000 a year. We had to scale down the size of the yacht we thought we could buy. And that particular application has never reached the tornado. It's a very good business. It operates out of Boston. It's a great business, and I'm still a large shareholder. But it is never, for whatever reason, and that would be a long conversation, managed to get into a tornado.
Okay.
So, we went from people saying, you're brilliant, we're brilliant, let's be brilliant together, but we're not going to pay you anything, to this is what I need, I'm willing to pay a lot of money for it because it will give me a huge competitive advantage and differentiate me from my competitors, to yes, this is important, we have to have this, everyone in our industry has to have it, but the price was down 80% from what we were at.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. I think.
And I just noticed Michelle's comment. I would be very cautious about giving anyone anything for free. Innovators want you to give stuff for free. That doesn't mean you should.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. And we're going to wrap that up. We've got about a minute. So thank you to Jesse and Rashaka for a really great, clear overview of pricing for everyone. Stephen, everyone who attended live got the bonus of a very detailed chat section. So appreciate you adding a lot of color and additional details, both in the chat and in the Q&A. And, thank you for being able to join us as well. And yeah, everyone, I think someone put in the link to the self-assessment tool on Ivica's website, but we'll include that link as well when we post the details. The video and the PowerPoint will be going up on our website. We'll send a link to where that is once it's all up. And yeah, apologies to those who showed up late. I think Eventbrite had some delays in sending out the confirmations because a whole bunch just came in now when the seminar is over. So hopefully you caught some of it live, and we'll send out the link for the rest. So yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you for all the thank yous I see coming through the chat. And Stephen, Jesse, and Rashaka, thanks again. Otherwise, have a great afternoon. Yeah,
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks all. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye, Stephen. Bye, everyone. See you, Jesse. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye.